The slick walls of the small goblin's dragon-scaled house shimmered the way iridescent objects do at dawn. The goblin, called Glut, didn't have much, but that also meant he didn't have many problems either. What Glut did own, however, was a handcrafted, complete 14-volume leather-bound collector's edition of a goblin history. He opened the books often, feeling their soft covers and sniffing deeply at the old book smell. And many a visiting goblin brother had greedily coveted the human baby tooth collection he proudly used as drinking goblets. The wimpy Glut had one unparalleled indulgence which made his brother and sister goblins envious every time they scurried past. A single dragon eyelash rested in the place of honor as Glut's roof. The lightweight, weatherproof lash perfectly straddled the rotting trees and his dragon scale wall. Glut knew this treasure made his life lack nothing. A single roar bellowing over the damp field changed the entire goblin day. The time had come to settle up with the dragon in charge. Majestic not only protected the goblins, he gave them objects from his own body to make their lives prosper. The walls of Glut's own home were a testimony to that. The goblin brothers and sisters made use of everything the dragon had to offer. Majestic's talon trimmings were used for eardrops, eye drops, and even nose drops. The eyelashes, like Glut had, were a once-in-a-millennium find. Unlike the rest of the dragon's body, they were not gifts. The eyelashes had to be returned at the mighty dragon's request. At the end of each century, all of the goblins knew that anyone who had the good fortune to procure an eyelash must make full payment to the dragon. Most often, this involved simply returning the eyelash to the dragon. None of the goblins knew or dared ask what Majestic did with the treasured lashes after their return. The flowers whispered the rumor that each one became a new dragon under a specific planetary alignment, but none of the goblins were certain of that. When goblins had been able to keep a dragon eyelash, it was because they had something the dragon valued enough to trade. Finding large goose eggs in the vast fields was a terrific way to pay off a long eyelash. The eggs, however, were maddeningly elusive. Glut was the worst at finding goose eggs. With eyes as beady as Glut's, a goose was a rare sight. But that didn't stop him from trying. Wading through the wet mud flats was his favorite place to look. His search often proved fruitless, but he loved the way the mud smelled. He'd flick it off his hairy legs after it dried, providing fun for days after a long goose egg search. These happy memories dissipated instantly in the wake of the dragon's bellow. It was time to settle up with the benevolent dragon, but Glut had nothing he wanted to give up and no goose eggs to barter with. He sadly stuffed each volume of his coveted books and all of the baby-tooth goblets in a burlap sack. He held it up to the light and let it tumble to the floor. There was simply no way his daily delights would be enough to cover an entire eyelash. He sadly joined the march of the goblins as all of the brothers and sisters came out from underneath the dragon scales and rocks and underground goblin bunkers they lived in. They were a sorry lot, for goblins are very greedy, and Glut was not the only empty-handed one. The goblins had been blessed with so much. They were simply too selfish to want to repay their debts, even in the hot breath of the mighty dragon. Majestic's handsome gaze laid to rest on the small goblin Glut. Glut simply shivered and looked down, knowing he had a debt he could not pay. Where is the eyelash you have enjoyed for 99 years, Glut? The dragon's voice hummed. It is time to settle accounts if you want to keep it. I require it and hope you'll give it back. Glut's tears welled up in his moldy green eyes as he stammered. That eyelash is my roof. Water glides off of it, keeping me dry in the coldest hours of the morning. It protects my books and my goblets and my life. I lack for nothing so long as I have that eyelash. The small goblin sobbed as he looked down, clutching his hands to his chest. Please, he begged, please be patient with me. Just another decade, and I will pay it all back, he croaked. The dragon took a deep breath in, and Glut shuddered. He clenched his teeth and grimaced, bracing himself to be fired in the dragon's fierce presence. To Glut's surprise, the vibrations of the dragon's voice clamored over the goblin's body instead of fiery pain. Enjoy the eyelash for the rest of your days, Glut. It brings you joy that I cannot justify taking away, the dragon slowly purred. Glut had never worn his toothless smile as broadly as he did that day. He marveled at the unbelievable blessing from Majestic, the marvelous dragon. His books, his goblets, and his eyelash, they were all his. His greed was sated for a moment until Glut spied old Stump. A rush of memory pushed to the front of Glut's mind as he smiled a lip-curling grin. 49 years earlier, Stump had borrowed a single granule of sugar for his birthday tea, and Stump had never returned the favor to Glut. The simple Stump smiled as the greedy Glut came closer. Poor old fool. Glut throttled the older goblin, tears stinging his angry eyes. Pay me back what you owe me, he growled. Stump choked out, I still haven't any sugar, as he fell from Glut's grasp. There was no mercy in Glut's next words. To the dragon fire with you, then, until you deliver that granule back to me. I require it, and you've had plenty of time to pay back what's rightfully mine. Glut grabbed Stump's bony wrist and began to drag him toward the liquid lake of fire. Many a goblin who had blundered had been sent near there to live in torment, for it was far too hot for a goblin's gloomy nature. The flowers in the field were usually so docile and said so very little. This lack of mercy, though, was too much for their tender hearts to bear. Over the next few hours, they slowly swiveled their yellow faces toward the dragon and begged him to listen to the outrage of Glut's greed. The humble wildflowers were so pure and so trusting of the dragon, he sensed their urgency and heeded their fervent call. The dragon only had to take 4 steps to come between Glut, Stump, and the fiery liquid lake of his own tears. He lowered his head as close to the wet earth as it would come. As Stump passed out, his fleeting thought before the blackness was to swear off sugar for the rest of his natural life. Glut alone was the dragon's concern. You wicked servant, the dragon glowered, baring his teeth. The ground began to steam with his seething anger. I canceled your debt because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your brother goblin, just as I had on you?" he snarled. The dragon's eyes blazed at Glut, and then at the glowing lake where he knew Stump would have perished in Glut's unforgiveness. With a shove of Majestic's mighty tail, he forced a river of the fiery tears alongside Glut's beloved home, instantly vaporizing the eyelash roof into nothingness. The dragon scale walls were enough to protect Glut's prized books and his precious baby teeth goblets, but he would be tortured daily by the harsh winters and the cruel summers. His thoughts banged around inside of his head, endless torture for the unforgiveness of one granule of sugar. "Mercy, mercy, mercy," whispered the flowers to the goblins in the damp moonlight. Unless the goblins forgave each other from their greedy hearts, they were all doomed, for the justice of the dragon never failed.